standout interview is obviously one where they're making the right noises, backing it up and giving evidence. Some people are quite slick at presenting themselves and selling their achievements. Others are too humble at times. It's not really the time to be humble. You can be down to earth, but you're getting an opportunity to present yourself in best light.
Hey, this is Gareth Webb, and you're listening to Breakout, a show that cuts through the hiring noise. Here, you'll get an unfiltered view on what early and growth stage companies are doing so that you can take their best practices, processes, and frameworks and implement them to help you build teams more confidently.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you.
So we are week 2, episode 2 into our podcast. We spoke about organization design and structure and just how to kind of get a little bit more intentional with that. This week, wanted to kind of piggyback off of that, but kind of go one step further and talk about interviews and what an effective interview looks like. Again, kind of given your experience in probably a multitude of interviews and talking with many clients about interviews, I think you probably have a unique perspective on what effective or great looks like and where maybe companies go wrong. So I wanted to kind of pick your brain on that today. Kind of curious, I guess, just start out. Do you have an idea of how many interviews you may have been a part of over the years?
I could run some very quick math. If you take into account just us talking to people, then that in itself would be well and truly into the thousands, I guess. And then talking to people, the actual ones that have happened with our clients, then it's good at tens, hundreds of thousands, I guess. It's interesting because obviously like sometimes you're just talking to somebody very quickly and that is kind of like a very quick screen call, which is almost an interview. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the ones that move through to being spoken to, but yeah, a lot. Yeah. And it's interesting how it's always seems to be the same kind of things that work and don't work even now with
I'm sure there's
being remote, digital type interviews.
Probably a pretty consistent theme, which is going to be good, I think, for today. So I guess starting out, obviously interview piece is very important within the job process itself on both ends. Any thoughts on like what makes a good interview at a high level, or why is a great interview so important to nail down?
Yeah, the whole premise of the interview is interesting because I think obviously not many people love them, especially being on the receiving end of being the person being interviewed. And some people can interview particularly well. So there is an artificial setting almost. And so many companies don't interview particularly well and just let people get on with it and tell them to interview somebody. But there should be a methodology and a structure to it. And there should be training, but that doesn't always particularly happen. I think that a standout interview is obviously one where there's no red flags at all. Maybe there's some parts to the conversation which are just deemed to be neutral, and it's like the candidate has got themselves across okay, but then for the most part has just impressed. And impressed obviously is the word we hear is like, yeah, really impressive. Like, and it's like all very positive language and making the right noises and backing it up and giving evidence. So some people are quite slick at presenting themselves and selling their achievements. Others are probably too humble at times. It's not really the time to be humble. You can be down to earth, but you're getting an opportunity to present yourself in best light. So I think like the really good interviews are where there are little to no red flags and there's a lot of strength signals that basically that the person is impressing who they're interviewing. There's a lot of talk about really good interviews just being a discussion. I think that's a little bit idealistic. There should be some good flow to it, but I don't think that you're going to extract enough information to truly evaluate mutual fit if it is just a nice conversation or discussion. Like it should have some pressing points to it that force some truths around the level of experience or the level of depth of knowledge around a particular subject matter. I think that's missing quite a lot. It's almost, we live in a world where people don't want to be seen to be challenging people too much or being rude to them or putting them too much on the spot. And so I think that quite often the interviews are not necessarily too easy, but a bit too wishy-washy. They don't necessarily have the structure and the issues that the methodology to force the issue. So I think like the good interviews are quite punchy, have a good rhythm to them. They delve deeper beyond they don't just take surface value with every answer, and they are probably as much as possible evidence-based.
It's interesting. It kind of brings me back. I remember doing some training for interviews in my previous job, and they kind of showed what
you give the interviews.
Yeah,
to interview people.
To interview. They had, I can't remember who it was, but it was someone who'd been in the company a while back, and they actually filmed an interview process or mock interview with him and interviewing someone, and went through it. And it did feel very kind of short, sharp, punchy, and almost where he'd go and almost interrupt a little bit to kind of keep things moving along. So I can see as an interviewer taking that level of, I don't know, control maybe isn't the right answer or right description for it, but it's just kind of interesting.
So if you're the company interviewing for somebody to come in, you obviously need to sell. You do need to present a good case for that person to be interested and make sure they know why they're potentially there. But it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that fit is established, not just oh yeah, they're really nice and I think they could be good here and they seem to know what they're talking about. You should be categorically clear. I got the impression they completely understood the role. They answered my questions very well. They seem composed. You're establishing fit on skill and experience, but the big thing that we have seen more so now, because people are not always sat around the table, is just the ability to communicate clearly, concisely, consistently, and still gain people's attention, because there's lots of distractions and it's easy to get in too much. Zoom fatigue is essentially interview fatigue as well. It's the same kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with controlling it as long as you are being respectful, because that person doesn't necessarily have to be there. You still got to convince them that you're a good team member or a boss and a good place to work.
Cool. I've marked a few things for us to touch on a little bit later. I think that might be more pertinent down the road in this conversation. So I've kind of bucketed out a few different things just around preparation, communication, the interview itself. And I think we can go ahead and wrap up after that. But so I guess starting out preparation wise, what does a good preparation look like on both the candidate and maybe client end? We can tackle both ends. Let's start with that.
So I think it's safe to assume that probably 90% plus of interviews are happening via a video conference type setup. Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people in that way to come and work for us, and seen and heard the feedback from clients. It's don't want to have too much of a sweeping statement, but the people that clearly have prepared are therefore the ones that probably want to impress or be part of the organization more. It's not normally a surprise to me that the ones that have reasonably orderly background and presentation style actually showcase themselves in a bit more an orderly fashion as well, and they seem more organized and more structured. Or you need to think about, the way I see it is an interview should be can I imagine myself working with this person, with, for, or together? And you want to have trust and faith in that person that you're being part of the same team, and that there's standards upheld, and there's a work ethic, and there's a style that you're happy for them to talk to a customer if you're not available, or interview somebody else if you're not available. So I think it's just a standards thing. So the things that we try to tell people to do to just mitigate risk is a tidy, clean background. Or if you don't have that, because say you're a younger person living with friends and there's stuff in the background, then have just a neutral, clear background that just removes the ability for people to be overly judgmental, because you are being judged. Then there's lighting, there's dress code. There's one of the things that kind of irritates me is when people have their camera off to the side, so they might be looking at you on the screen, but you are looking at them.
Kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, so some self-awareness around engaging the person. If you've got 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, that should be real valuable time. So to spend the time preparing. If you were to go into a face-to-face interview, last one I did phone call, video call, and then on-site pre-COVID. I didn't dress as I would dress to go to work. I just didn't wear a suit or anything like that. So it is strange, because everyone knows that once you're working with each other, you'll be dressed like this in a t-shirt and jeans or shorts or whatever. There are companies that still prefer that someone has a collar or a jacket. I don't really understand that personally. I think it's best to start a little bit on the smarter end.
Slightly smarter than you might normally dress on a given workday.
Yeah, unless they tell you otherwise. So we always say to people, hey, look, we're a super casual, informal dress code environment. But then having said that, it is always quite nice to see people that are slightly a notch above, because you're like, okay, you're taking this seriously. So again, there's some artificial dynamic going on. I think it's completely fine for people to just completely dress as they would at work. And if they want to wear an Angry Birds t-shirt and that's what they wear, that's fine. But you run the risk of not necessarily trumping other candidates for that reason, which seems, some people say it's a big reason. I mean, we've joked about this before, but we've had people turn up to a Zoom interview walking on a treadmill during the interview for like a director level role. It sort of seems bizarre choice to me to do that when you could just wait and do it afterwards or before. And it just, both sides need to feel comfortable. So prep should be good. I think you should just try to present yourself in best light, seem orderly. Obviously, it kind of goes without saying, but it doesn't, because it always happens where people are just not prepped on the role and the business well enough. So companies love it when you know them inside out, and you make that clear, like financials, products, pricing, having used the product, and like problems with sign-up flow or problems with certain features, functionality. That just shows that you care and that you're therefore probably be better at the job because you've got some curiosity levels that are required in the technology space. And then for clients who are interviewing, the worst is when they just turn up to the interview and they haven't even looked at the person's profile or resume or notes, and they're going in and wasting time on the fact finding up front. And so we try to make sure that the interviews are, a lot of the fact finding has been established, and it's far more about a deep dive into fit. And so the perfect interview is obviously where you believe there's fit, it looks like there's fit, let's just prove it, rather than, oh, I'm not sure if there's any fit, like I'm going to now
have the conversation and
wasting people's time, because they've probably answered all those questions anyway when they've been screened. If you think about whether they've spoken to us or they've spoken to an internal talent team, people giving the 5-minute life story is painful multiple times, especially if somebody's interviewing for a few roles. So just making sure that like you're validating fit rather than trying to establish fit is potentially how I would expect a good interview.
Validating versus trying to establish during the interview process.
Well, yeah, because everybody wants more time back. So just spending 5-10 minutes in prep will make the 30-40 minute interview or whatever duration far more significant and meaningful for everybody. And also people remember a good interview experience, even if they didn't get the job. Like, it's a really good learning sometimes. And so, yeah, like if that helps you further on with that company or with a different company, like you want to feel like it was a learning experience.
On the client end, I know last time we spoke, it was more around org design and determining what the attributes are that are must-haves versus some of the nice-to-haves or nice-to-haves. How does that play into this like preparation end on the client end? Where does that like fall within the interview process? Does that continue throughout? Is that part of the fact finding? I guess, like, what is that? If you had to string those two together.
Yeah, you're trying to gather evidence or data. The whole tell me about a time when's great, but it's like, you're not necessarily going to find, you might get a good answer, but it doesn't necessarily help you establish fit. I'd much prefer people to like talk about or give and produce good examples of work.
What would a good example of that look like?
When we kind of said, okay, come and talk to us about how you would tackle the first 3, 6, 9 months, and put that, not necessarily a business plan, but just like a flow of work that you would want to try and achieve and some results tied to that. And then so you presented in a way that showed you'd gone and done research, gone actually created some copy and talked about some growth strategies, growth metrics. Therefore, sat there, it's an interview, but it's not. It's more of a, like, I'm enjoying seeing how this person's thinking and the quality of output is there. I think the preparation from a client is that. It's like, what are the things you're assessing for against going back to the position itself and the description or the profile of the role? What evidence do you need? What signals are you trying to acquire? What are the red flags? So, like a lot of our clients don't want people just from huge companies because they believe that they're over-resourced or not scrappy enough. So if you're trying to find evidence of scrappiness or resourcefulness, how can you isolate that? I personally like to go beyond just having a wordy answer. So can you show us some of that stuff? It depends on the role as well. So engineering is quite straightforward. You can run a coding exercise, or you can look at a product and ask someone to talk through code or write some code. Product, you can ask someone to write a spec or potentially show you some designs. Sales, marketing, more kind of like administrative functions, a little harder to maybe assess for. I mean, sales arguably is the hardest. People say that all the time, but you're looking for evidence, and therefore the preparation means that the questions have to enable people to arrive at an answer. And then knowing what a good answer is, and then thinking, like, can you, after an interview, go and debrief with your team and explain why the person's a yes, no, or a maybe? I quite like the idea of a strong yes, a yes, an unsure, a no, and a strong no, because then you have kind of a sensible continuum of conviction. But we still see it now where you have this continuum of like a strong yes, a yes, maybe, no, strong no, which is what a lot of people feedback on. It's very surprising to me that we still get some people with a strong yes and some with a no or a strong no. And so how does that happen? Like, that's the bit that I am baffled by. If everybody's been briefed properly on, especially for like a director or VP level role. So we had it recently for a VP role, and the chief customer officer was a strong yes, and she is not an easy person to interview with. And the VP of strategy was a no, based on, he was an overall, I like the guy, he's smart, but his experience is not what we need right now. And yet the chief customer officer was emphatically strong yes on all points. So how on earth does that happen? So that means they just haven't prepped properly. They haven't sat down. They haven't established consensus. They haven't agreed on these are the things that the person needs to do and be good at. So that for me is just a real sad waste of everybody's time, when there's probably really good intention there. They're a good company. They're a public company. They're cool products, smart people. But just the basics of their internal comms has meant that someone is now, not even them or us, but like some poor person has wasted potentially like 5-6 hours of their life, plus all the prep. So there should be this ongoing cadence of, here's what we're trying to do, here's how it should be done, here's what we want to hear in a debrief. I don't think people do that. I think it's all kind of done on a whim, which is honestly quite disappointing, especially at that level. Just everybody has to spend a little more time preparing for how they interview, how they want to make the decision, and how consensus is built.
Let's talk really quick about, I guess, what does an ideal process look like? When it's too long? And then how many people ideally should be involved, at the level, I guess, where OutScout kind of typically hires for? Or is there a good answer for that?
Yeah, obviously not too many and not too few is the basic answer, but it doesn't mean you have to have hour-long blocks with, say there's 5 people, you don't have 5 hours. The beauty of Zoom is that multiple people can be in the room without being in the room. So you have panels that exist, which I don't think that's a bad thing, because that's what it's like at work, group meetings or group sessions. I would say, depending on the size of the company, so anyone who's working with the person who is going to potentially be reliant on that person or have some ownership over their output should probably meet them to a degree. You could do a 4-week process for a senior level role and have 2 people a week and just keep that momentum going. There's times when that doesn't happen. You can easily have 2, 3, 4 people go into a panel, type into somebody. Again, that just has to be prepped slightly so that it's not free for all. I personally think doing 1s and 2s, like so one-on-one interviews, really good for like deeper conversations. And if that's the person you're going to work more closely with, that should happen. And then maybe if they're less involved with who they're interviewing, but it's important that they meet them, then maybe they go into a group interview. So there's 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, interviewing on a Zoom. And just as long as everybody knows, okay, like nobody can overly dominate the situation, and make sure you've got your 2-3 questions that are important to you. So I think in terms of like an actual duration of process, we see positions get filled in 2 weeks, like still quite senior level roles, but maybe they're more individual contributor roles. So it's establishing that they can do the work and they want to do the work, and that the hiring manager is approving. If it's a leadership type role, 30 days, so 4 weeks is doable. Probably, unfortunately, on average, it probably slips to more like 30 to 60 days, but still pretty good. There's some that would go over that, but there shouldn't really be the need. If everybody's got everything in order, I think 30 days is like 4 weeks is a good one a week, like one stage per week.
I was going to ask if that equates to a certain amount of rounds. Sounds like you kind of answered that though.
You could do more than one in a week.
Yep.
So it's just assuming most people have jobs, families, hobbies, asking somebody to do, say, an hour on a Monday or a Tuesday and then another hour on a Thursday, Friday, it's doable. If you're expediting, that's fine. But I'd say one a week is reasonable.
We've touched on communication a little bit, but I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on ways that the interviewer can properly help set expectations with a candidate, just to make sure that the level of transparency is high and the process feels like they know what's coming throughout the process.
Right. How much transparency should there be?
Or like, how would you properly set expectations for an interview process with your potential candidate?
So we always ask our clients, does that look like? And it's 50-50 whether they've thought about it or not, which again is not ideal. It's a red flag. So if they've thought about it and they'll have it laid out, ideally it's documented in some shape or form beneath the spec. So some clients have already thought about that. Some they're formulating it, and some they say, look, it's going to be a stage with the hiring manager, a round with the teammates, and then a final with, let's say, like the top decision maker, and then maybe another conversation with the hiring manager again, just to recap. That's kind of pretty sensible. But telling people up front really helps. Or we've heard all the horror. It used to be a really great thing that like Google did so many steps because they had the highest bar, and there's so many applicants, they wanted to whittle people out that way. And then obviously Amazon's the same. But I think all of those things are changing now. So shortening.
I feel like when I was interviewing here, you were very transparent at a level I've never seen, where it was, here's what this process is going to look like. And then I think right after our conversations, you were pretty upfront on, hey, I think this feels like it could be a good fit. After this, I want to go ahead and do A, B, and C. And then you're going to move on and talk with the team, talk with my partner. I feel like it can be sometimes cryptic, where it's like, okay, you're moving on to the next stage. It's like, what does that mean? Who am I talking with? I think those are sometimes helpful for even the candidate to better understand and just know what they're getting into, how to better prep for that conversation as well. And I felt like that was very transparent when we were going through it.
I think I did that as much for me as for you, just so that I could sanity check myself that it was thorough enough without being too arduous and painful. I'm sure it was reasonably painful. Interviews are largely, but I think trying to make it more of okay, we're going to carry momentum through here, and we're not going to get in the way. Here's what we want to do. Like going for a run. If someone says, right, you've got to go and run 10 miles, you're like, okay, I'll get my head around it. If someone says you're going for a run and then you just run it, and then you just keep going, it would be very hypocritical of us to have opaque processes where we spend a good portion of our time trying to educate and coach business leaders around just doing a better job of it. I think, laying it out, actually just putting a timeline in place, and then the person can either commit to it or not. Allows people to just say, hey, I can't commit to that. I've got other processes. And then that's fine. You obviously have to be slightly agile and nimble. If you find the one, or you believe them to be the one, you can make some changes.
Let's circle back a little bit on, you've touched on the interview process itself a little bit in terms of preparation, showing up, what to wear, that kind of stuff in some conversations. I wanted to touch on two things you brought up, red flags, just to dig into that a little bit more, identifying what those are. I'm sure it probably depends on who the person and or company is, and then just a little bit more on fit and just like, I guess, what a thought process might look like, or how should you be thinking about that, I guess, on both the client and candidate end during the interview process, and identifying those. So when leaving the interview, you have a better idea of, like you said, strong match, good match, not great match on both ends. What does that look like?
I think the big thing with red flags is making sure the person knows the not so great pieces about the role or the business and the challenges, because people are going to have to deal with that and that doesn't change, and it doesn't mean it's going to be fixed with the hire. So I think not enough do companies downplay a role or deliver like the sort of double pitch, which is, okay, this is the opportunity, these are the problems we have, this is what we need fixing, and then how might somebody do it, and then what happens to the business longer term if those things get fixed. There's too much, everything's great, this is a great company, you should definitely come work here, you're going to crush it. There's not enough of the underlying, no, actually we have these problems. Big dose of realism, and that will make some people run a mile, which is a good thing. But the smart people that enjoy those kinds of challenges should gravitate towards them. So I think red flags should be, okay, we should be establishing what can you do, what can't you do, what will you do, what won't you do, and then are we going to work together to figure this out? And if someone's got like a different style, like a more abrasive, direct style, or they're going to rub people up the wrong way at the business, or is that good? Like, do you need more of that? The people in the business know the business best. It's their job to inform the people interviewing of what they're getting themselves into. So I think for me, red flags are, for example, with us, we want people who are personable, but I don't want anyone that's too nice and doesn't seem to have a reasonably thick skin is not going to do well here, because it's hard work and we're an early stage business and things are tough and we're changing direction and we're figuring things out. So there's some people that are absolutely suited to certain types of companies and environments, whether they believe that to be the case or not. Like, not everybody knows themselves well enough to know exactly where they're going to be a great fit. And then some people are more adaptable or malleable. So the red flag thing really for me is like, okay, yeah, I just don't believe this is going to work based on the evidence and what I've heard and the style, or based on what we need. So another good example for that would be clients of ours looking to hire leaders, but those leaders must be doers and they don't have tons of resource. Even in some of our bigger clients where they're moving really fast, they're trying to do a lot, but there's not big departments or teams that they can use to get work done. So they don't want people who are pure strategists. They want people who can execute. So they want to know that person's happy executing and talking to customers or building, or like we have a product management hire going on at the moment, client hiring a bunch of product managers, and they've been very strict around having evidence that those product managers have been and sat and talked to and worked with customers, not just theoretically developed products. And so that's their red flag. It's like, okay, talk about like how you redevelop the product from a conversation with a customer. Now it sounds kind of straightforward, but not everybody has. Some people just take data and then try stuff and get the data and then reiterate. So there's truly trying to get red flags out of the way early. And I'd say that's the final point on that, is just, you should do that. Get the red flags, like establish the no-nos and the red flags really early, because finding them at the end of a 4-week process is an absolute waste of time again, which definitely happens.
So I think we are coming up on time. So I wanted to go ahead and wrap things up. I think what I wanted to do is just do a quick recap of main takeaways we spoke through today for, I guess, both the client end and the candidate end. Do you want to take a stab at it?
So the client end is, my takeaway is the prep and the internal comms before you even get going. So internal comms about the position itself, and then the assessment and how you carry those comms through the process. So discussing before what's going to be a yes and what does that mean and how do we prove it, and then what's going to be a no, and the same, like why. You should not have, you will always have it, but you shouldn't have too many examples of someone giving a really strong yes and someone giving a no for the same position on the same interviewing committee. You may have a neutral and a no, or a neutral and a yes, but you shouldn't have a strong yes and then a no, especially when the no is more to do with like what's needed in the role. That should be really clear. So clarity and definition on role, on fit and assessment criteria, and then how you agree. And you can disagree, but like it shouldn't be a commonplace occurrence. And then I think also with the clients is not being afraid to, not being deemed or perceived to be too nice about it and having a really fluffy, nice conversation. That's not helping anybody. got to be courteous and professional, but it's got to be pretty challenging. And good candidates will want to feel challenged anyway. On the candidate side, sounds boring. Same thing, like prep. And I think the thing that candidates need to be aware of is that these people are interviewing quite a few folks, and probably more so now with Zoom. So you have to stand out, you have to engage, smile, be authentic, but professional. It's a fine line, which some people are too professional, some people are probably too authentic or themselves. But yeah, you want to showcase that, like, and find out for yourself as well, is this a place I want to work? There's a style of these people, and just because they're challenging you doesn't mean that they're not good people to work with. So I think that the prep, the clarity and brevity of comms and the examples that you have, and then obviously, but again, it sounds obvious, but doesn't happen enough, is just questioning at the end. So there's no way you have no questions, even after the best interview. And if the person's been really thorough and explaining stuff to you, there's absolutely no way there should be no questions, because you're coming at it from your own line of thinking during that 30, 40-minute interview. I think 45 minutes probably is kind of optimal. There's no way you shouldn't have a single question to ask. You should almost have those questions going into the interview. If they got answered, then fine, but there's probably still things you'd like to know, just real detailed nuances about a team working or plan or issues that the business have had. So I think there's like the prep, there's the execution of the interview, and then there's the questioning at the end. Those, I think, are what make a really good candidate stand out. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to reduce, there's like risk mitigation. So like we talked about it, just like nothing too strange or red flag-esque. Walking on the treadmill during your interview, I would say, is completely unnecessary. Even that is what you do at work all day, every day. You know, having a really messy, like cluttered background doesn't do you any favors. Like, you could just sort that stuff out at the push of a button these days.
Blur the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. I think this will be a really helpful conversation. I was looking at some just search results and the sheer amount of searches around interview prep and questions to ask. And well, I'm not going to be able to give you much context outside of what this number means. I should have looked this up, but I think it was like just in the US alone, like a little over 34,000 monthly searches around just interviews alone. So obviously something that people are thinking about quite a bit, and good material out there, but I think this discussion will be hopefully helpful for both sides.
Yeah, hopefully. It's an ongoing battle. You know, there's definitely people out there that are like naturals at interviewing and are very composed, and then on the client side anyway, and then there's offenders out there. The big takeaway, I would say, if I was like managing a big team, a big company, doing a whole wave of hiring, it's like, just be respectful of time, be respectful of people's energies, be respectful that they may be going through tough time even if they're in a job and they're trying to change jobs. It's really stressful. So, and then if you're a candidate, be respectful of the executive's time and energy, do the prep, do the diligence, treat it like a business transaction, which is what it is, and treat it as a learning experience. And you can't go too far wrong if you have that mindset. Cool. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Breakout. If you want to hear more, make sure to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to be the first to get notified when future episodes are released. If you like the show or want to share feedback, please leave a review so we can keep improving and share the word with other leaders in the tech talent space. If you have suggestions for topics we should cover, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Gareth.